Alright, what's going on, guys? Hope you all are doing well. This is going to be ranking every gun in PUBG from worst to best. This is the most updated 2022 ranking list that exists so far for the game, and since the last time I made a video ranking weapons, there has been an absolute plethora that are added. So there's a ton of guns in the game now, and we're going to review them all. We're going to talk about which situations and like how to run them properly, and what guns you should seek out and which to stay away from as you're playing the game, especially if you're brand new. This will most likely help out a ton. It's also important to understand the parameters for how I'm ranking. These are based on general effectiveness and more or less its position in the meta in game. And it's also not to say that, you know, weapons that are ranked maybe one after another are inherently better. You can almost separate them into like general tiers as we go throughout this list, but you'll see what I mean, because a lot of weapons are hard to just compare one to another, but you'll see what I mean when we get into this list. But if you guys don't mind, I took a ton of time to put this video together, so I would really appreciate a thumbs up if this helps out at all. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for more PUBG content. And I also do have a PUBG creator code that you guys can use on your account. If you check the link in the description, it'll take you right to it and you can enter my name. That'd be amazing. But yeah, got a lot to go through today, so let's get started. Coming in at the worst spot on this list is surprisingly one of the new guns, and I can't even really classify it as a weapon technically, but I guess it is in the game. So this is the M79 smoke grenade launcher, and I gotta say, I don't think you can really do any damage with this, but it does serve at least a decent purpose when it comes to, you know, having an alternative to throwing a smoke grenade. It's a little more streamlined, a little more straightforward, but other than that, really no purpose in game. After that, we have the Panzerfaust. This got introduced when Karakin came out, and this is kind of one of those guns that you just pick up and use right when you find it, and then go back to whatever your primary weapon was, because you only get one shot with it. It's extremely difficult to use sometimes, and you can actually kill people with the back blast of it, but that's really about it. Doesn't have a lot of utility in game, and I genuinely don't think I've ever been killed by one. Coming in just above that, we have the sawed-off shotgun, an absolute pathetic excuse of a weapon, and while this can technically take a barrel attachment, I'm going to be honest, it's not going to help you at all. This weapon, in terms of being a bullet gun, is absolutely sinister. Everything from the range and damage are both extremely pathetic, and you may as well quit the game if this is the only thing you can find right off the bat if you hot drop. Yeah, certainly not a great gun. I don't think they're ever going to buff this either. I think it's going to stay exactly where it is. Coming up just above that is one of our other low-tier representatives, and honestly a gun I'm not even sure why it's still in the game. This is the R45 pistol, and it's just an inferior version of the Deagle. To be fair, it's got decent hip fire, the fire rate is alright as well, but other than that, really nothing else to boast in terms of attributes. Pretty useless gun, and I'm not a fan of it at all. Up next, we've got the twin shotguns. I'm going to rank both the double barrel and the pump shotgun in basically the same tier, because they're more or less the same weapon. And the way I always described it was the pump shotgun's going to be better for squad games, and whereas the double barrel is going to be better for solo one-on-one interactions. But I don't know what they did to shotguns in the time that I was taking a break, but they feel, I mean, they were never great, but they feel significantly worse now than they used to. I'm not sure what it is, but I would stay pretty far away from these, especially in the mid to late game. However, if you are choosing to run a shotgun, always use the shotgun choke attachment over the duckbill. The duckbill makes the pellets spread more horizontally, and while that may sound good, it makes your gun feel way more inconsistent. After that, still in our lower tier of guns, obviously, this is going to be the standard 7.62 Revolver, and I've never liked this weapon for a lot of reasons, but at least at the end of the day, it has a lot of power capacity, right? It can one-shot somebody with no helmet, but that's really about it. Besides its absolutely atrocious reload time, another thing that's always bothered me about the gun is the reload animation. It's so in your face and bulky, you can't even really see your screen, so if you want to know where enemies are, don't even bother using this weapon. Coming up after that is the P92, and now I can't recommend back on the Revolver that I recommend trying to find any attachments for it, especially like the suppressor, but the P92 maybe is a little different. Obviously, it's going to be far less damage per bullet as it shoots 9mm instead, but with this weapon, I actually recommend at least a laser sight. It seems to help out a lot. Now, it's not the fastest killing pistol in the game, but to be honest, it will be really good to help newer players kind of learn the game, and it's probably one that is the most forgiving to people that are just beginning. And also now with the major change in mechanics where you can use pistols to shoot from the front seat of cars, it's pretty helpful. Up next though, I'm going to rank these two weapons right next to each other. This is going to be both the P18C, which is the Glock, and also the 1911. Now, interestingly, with the Glock, I noticed something right when I fired it that I didn't seem to notice before my break. It looks like they changed the muzzle flash effect, which addressed my biggest problem with this weapon. It was impossible to see what you were aiming at because of the muzzle flash. Now, that can be mitigated mitigated through a suppressor, which that and a red dot and extended mag do really well on both of these weapons, but especially on the Glock, and even just the new effect in general makes it far more tolerable. So very interesting to see them kind of, fix pistols a little bit. But coming in just above that is something I can't honestly look at you and say I recommend any more than a pistol. This is the PP Bison, and while technically this is an SMG that came with Vikendi that a lot of people thought was going to be one of the meta weapons and probably one of the best guns in the game, turns out to be statistically one of the worst. It has a pretty slow fire rate, very little in terms of customization. You can't really change anything from its magazine or any grips, and also has one of the slowest time to kills overall. Sure, in theory, this could give you a fair chance at getting kills, but to be honest, if you're playing against anybody with a relative degree of competency in this game, you're going to get outgunned by nearly everything else that exists, possibly even pistols included. If you're trying to use the PP Bison against somebody with level 3 armor, forget about it. So just above that is the Winchester 94. The good old Winnie used to not even have any optics at all. For those of you who weren't playing PUBG years ago, the Winchester used to never be able to take any kind of scope. It had built-in iron sights and they were absolutely horrendous. Now, the fact that it has a scope makes it a lot more viable. That said, however, I still think it's one of the more lower, maybe mid-lower tier guns in the game. It doesn't hit as well as a Carnegie Ak does, and the only thing you can really take is bullet loops when it comes to attachments. So not a ton in terms of customizability, but every now and again you'll probably get some use out of the Winchester, just not very often at all. Up next, we've got the S12 Shotgun, which by all measures is at least a step above all of the shotguns we talked about previously, due to the fact that you can actually put most AR attachments on this weapon, and especially the magazine and the flash hider seem to do really well on the S12. Even with all that in mind, I still can't say I end up using this weapon a ton, or at least any time out of the early game. That's something PUBG's always struggled with, is incentivizing shotguns in the mid to late game, but it does the job in the early game for sure. Coming up after that is the Mp5, which I can genuinely say is still one of the best beginner guns, but aside from that, and especially without attachments, I don't think has much use in the meta. Now, the recommended setup that I would say is probably something like a red dot, and when it comes to grips, either an angled or a vertical will be nice, but the UMP just doesn't have the same killing power like it used to. It actually used to fire 9mm way back in the day, and they changed it to the Mp5, and it just hasn't hit the same since those days. I would say the Mp5 is at the very top or near the top of low tier. We're kind of getting into that range right now. Up next, I'm actually going to give this to the Scorpion pistol, and yes, I'm ranking a pistol in this game higher than an SMG, and that's because the Scorpion is basically in the wrong class. This may as well be a pocket SMG that is really customizable in terms of everything. You put extended mag, optics, even barrel attachments. It's really well handled, and also that it's one of those things where it's pretty popular in the esports scene as well. Practically speaking, it's just as if not more effective than the UMP, but it doesn't take up a primary weapon slot, and that's the main draw to it. So I actually think it's a very solid weapon. Just after that, we have the Tommy gun, which in recent times has been much better than it has the past few years, when it became a non-airdrop weapon. And interestingly, you can only put basically a suppressor on the barrel, and also a vertical grip is the only one that's compatible. And I would say that it's a really good early to mid game weapon, but late game it struggles at anything remotely past 50 meters. So can't say I recommend it for anything else, but it's a lot of fun to play for sure. After that though, now is where I'd say we've entered our true average or mid tier of these weapons going forward, and this one is going to be the VSS. Again, a really great weapon, but extremely situational. Attachment wise, this does really well with the extended quick draw, and the cheek pad makes a massive difference, especially when full auto spraying, and it obviously sounds a lot louder to the user than it does to anybody else you're shooting at. But that's always been the main gimmick of the weapon, is you are essentially impossible to detect at a range. Just above that, however, is what I would call probably the best gun in the early game, or at least an early game monster for sure. The Micro Uzi is not only very customizable with attachments, compensators do extremely well in it, and the extended mag is an absolute godsend, but all in all, this weapon was literally built for winning one-on-one gunfights. It's probably one of the best things to find right when you land, and obviously you're probably going to trade it out as the game goes on unless you pair it with something else like a DMR is usually pretty good, but on its own, this weapon can stand on its own 2 feet. It just needs attachments is the only major thing about it. Coming in just above that, the next weapon is the, I still believe, Sanok exclusive QBU. It's been a while since I've really had a lot of experience to use this gun in game, but but it's very similar to the Mini 14 statistically speaking. There are a few differences in like bullet velocity, and I believe the damage tables are slightly different as well. This one comes with a bipod. When you prone, it completely eliminates the recoil. However, I gotta say, I just can't really get with the groove of this sniper rifle, this DMR. For whatever reason, it just isn't my thing. Don't get me wrong, just because it's in like what I would classify average tier, it's still like competitively viable. It's still a very good gun overall in terms of the meta of the rest of the weapons that exist in game. It's just not one of my favorite personally. The gun doesn't feel that good to me, and I don't know, I just tend to always watch myself passing it up. Don't know what it is exactly. It's fine on paper, I just don't play it a lot. Up next though, we have the Deagle, and despite it being a pistol, I would still rank this in the average or at least mid-tier of weapons. It is by far the best handgun in the game, and I think that's pretty much indefensible. It does great with laser sights, and in my opinion, doesn't even really need a red dot, although you can run it. It has pretty decent iron sights to begin with, so I would say this is one of the very few, I guess, sidearms that's even worth running, and now the fact that you can shoot it from cars makes it even more viable. So big fan of the Deagle, and I would also like to think that at least our channel had a small hand in making that happen in the game, because we begged for it like literally for years. Up next though, we have the Sanok exclusive assault rifle, the QBZ, and on paper this is statistically a very good gun. I have pretty much nothing negative to say about it. It just isn't my favorite when it comes to running a primary assault rifle. I just feel like there's better options, but that's not to say in any way, shape, or form that this is a bad choice to run. I think it does particularly well with a 3x scope, also compensators and a vertical grip. It's an extreme laser beam at even medium range. Very easy to handle recoil and a pretty modest fire rate. I would just say the time to kill is a little bit on the slow side for my liking, so if you're getting used to the game and if you're playing Sanok specifically, QBZ is never a bad option, and it's a good mix-up from time to time if you're just running the same guns over and over again. Next up though is a weapon that really pains me to call it average tier, but my god has it fallen since it was in airdrops. This is the M249 Lmg. This one fires 5.56 as you guys know, and when it was in airdrops and before its nerf, this used to be probably the scariest gun in the game overall. Great for fighting squads because of its, you know, really large magazine capacity, but now because of its damage nerf, it's been removed from airdrops. This weapon is not nearly the same of what it used to be. And I know it sounds like I'm dogging on it quite a lot, but I'm just trying to find something negative to say about it, you know, just because it is what it is. But all in all, it's still a really good gun. You know, you have to respect it on the battlefield, but it's not the beast that it used to be, that's for sure. Next up though is another assault rifle that's very close in effectiveness and just overall functionality to the QBZ, and this is the G36. This was available exclusively first on Vikendi. I'm not sure which maps it is on now because they did add it to a few different ones, so it's you'll get the opportunity to play with it in game, just maybe not as much as some other ones. But this weapon plays really well with the 3x scope. I actually think it's probably better to run that than it is like a red dot. Both angled grips and vertical grips, in my opinion, are the best kitted on this weapon, and compensators are great if you just want straight recoil control. It doesn't do bad with a suppressor either, but again, there are some other options that I would recommend if possible over the G36, but it's a great weapon to play, and it is a ton of fun as well. Next weapon on our list is, I guess we're starting to approach like higher tier, but still a pretty average overall weapon. This is the Dbs Shotgun, and for clarity, this is the post-patch version. This gun used to be in airdrops over a year ago. I think it's like a year and a half ago at this point. The Dbs used to be absolutely insane before its removal from drops and its subsequent nerf. To be fair, now it's still really good in early game, and it's probably the best shotgun overall, but still isn't anything to write home about. Basically no attachments for customizability besides an optic, which doesn't really matter on this gun. So I think it is very good in and of itself, but it's not anything that's like competitive or super top tier. Just after that, about to approach our high tier of weapons is the M16 Assault Rifle, and if you've been playing PUBG since like 2017 or when it released, there was a time in which this was the king. This was the best gun in the game, hands down, and it's undergone a number of rebalances, nerfs, and all that kind of stuff, and overall it's still pretty decent in the meta, but it's not the most competitive gun. The iron sights are absolutely criminal, and you cannot run it really without any sort of optic. Burst fire is okay on this surprisingly. In single single tap is kind of the way to go. It just, there so happens to be weapons that are easier to use that will kind of grant you the same results, but either way, not a bad gun. Next up though, we've got the K2, and this assault rifle honestly was kind of hard to rank because I don't have a lot of experience with this one. I believe it came out with Tygo, and the interesting thing is it handles very much like the QBZ, but it doesn't have any options for a grip. You can put, you know, a barrel attachment on it, an optic, and also a magazine, but that is essentially all. The recoil is somewhat hard to manage, but the damage is pretty decent at the very least. But I don't know. I don't think this gun gets a lot of playtime because of the maps that it's on. You guys can let me know if where you would rank this one in particular. I just don't have as much experience with the K2 like I would like. Next weapon on our list though, we're starting to get to near the top of the average tier of weapons, and this is the Vector SMG. This one is absolutely incredible, as most of you guys know, and it's very customizable. And one of the attachments that's very interesting to me is the barrel. So anything you can put on the muzzle, a lot of weapons need something like a silencer to get rid of muzzle flare. The Vector does not, despite its really quick fire rate. So you can run like a compensator, a vertical grip, and an extended mag, which is very crucial on the Vector, and it is a literal machine. It's one of the best guns in the game as far as its time to kill. Obviously, it doesn't do very well at anything medium or long range, but you can have a secondary weapon to compensate for that, and then close range, the Vector's more than got you covered. After that, though, is a gun that may be a little bit controversial. I don't know. I feel like the AKM is one of those guns where you either really love it or you really hate it. For some people, they claim it's an absolute laser beam. For other people, all they can do is miss bullets. Objectively speaking, it doesn't have anything too crazy about it. It doesn't have the fastest time to kill, doesn't have the best magazine or anything, but can be very steady and dangerous in the right hands. But for most people, it is extremely hit or miss. I will say attachments make a big difference on the AKM. The iron sights really aren't great, and if you have a compensator at the very least, that's probably the best thing you can do for recoil, because it does have a fair amount of kick, although it is fairly linear. So yeah, definitely think the AKM's at least average tier, or at, if not high average tier. It's very good. Maybe not my favorite weapon ever, but it's very decent. The next gun after that could be described as what may be the AKM's bigger brother. This is the DP28, and despite its silly look, I actually find to be extremely practical in game. Not only is it a decent LMG because of its, magazine capacity and its damage per bullet's pretty high, but it also comes with a bipod, so if you do happen to prone out, it completely eliminates all the recoil. I'm literally not even doing anything pulling my mouse down in this clip. This gun is for sure a sleeper pick. It's low-key dangerous on the battlefield. So next up is a weapon I would say finally breaks into our high tier of weapons in PUBG. This one is the Sks Dmr. Now, it's not my favorite DMR, even when it comes to the 7.62 class overall, but it is great, and it's one of the most customizable ones in the game. Attachments that I would strongly recommend are easily the vertical grip, replaced with a half grip if you can't find one of those. Compensators or suppressors do really well on it, and then any high-powered scope, anything above a 3x, I would say does extremely good on the SKS. One potential downside, I would say it's got a lot of bounce per shot, and so a cheek pad helps this out tremendously, and I really can't even recommend running it without the cheek pad. That may be single-handedly the most important attachment for it, but otherwise, the SKS when fully kitted out is pretty great, and I would say it's potentially even better than the SLR without optimal attachments. Next up, though, is the Mp5 Smg, which also originated on Vikendi, and this is extremely customizable, very well-rounded weapon. I'd almost compare it to be the M4 of the SMG class. It's got a very good time to kill to boast alongside it as well. It is a laser beam with both a vertical grip and also a light grip are not bad on it. The light grip makes it a little bit harder to control horizontal, recoil-wise, but it makes the aim down sights very snappy, and it's a really good run and gun style of weapon. So strongly recommend you start playing this if you haven't done so before. Coming up above that are actually two weapons, both the Carnegie Ak and the Mosin, and these are statistically the exact same gun. The only real difference to speak of is the sound they make, so you can recognize them as they're being fired, but other than that, they are the same weapon, and they're the best bolt action sniper rifle that you can find commonly, besides one other one, but these are great at just one tapping level 2 helmets. Anything below that will be absolutely shredded. Great gun, and muscle memory with this, I would say, is key. Another thing to note with bolt action snipers is you're un-ADSing between each shot, so compensators will do nothing for you. Don't run them on bolt action snipers, and cheek pads also don't really do anything as long as you're holding your breath when you're shooting, so you may as well run bullet loops and a suppressor if you can find them. Those will be the most optimal ones for these kinds of snipers specifically. Up next, we've been approaching our higher tier of the high tier weapons, and this is going to be the Scar L, and this is probably my favorite 5.56 AR that isn't the M4, which is the most commonly one used. This one's a bit slow firing, but it has what I would say is the most amount of like realistic control, and you can also run it in a variety of ways, obviously with all kinds of attachments and stuff. It plays very well with just a standard red dot, but even everything up to possibly a 6x scope work pretty well on this gun. I got really nothing bad to say about it. It's solid all around. I love me the Scar. Next up, I would say from this point, we've officially entered the world of top tier guns in PUBG, and I would say near the bottom though, but still of top tier, is the Mini 14. This is one of the most used and popular weapons in the esports scene in PUBG, and there's a very good reason for that. This weapon's bullet velocity is second to none. It's very comparable. The only thing that even comes close is the AWM, but other than that, it fires 5.56 and it has very, very low recoil. This weapon best performs with something like a 6 or 8x scope, a compensator, or even a silencer do really well in it. Unfortunately, there's no cheek pad available for this gun, but it's very competitively viable, and I would say you're going to see this probably the most out of all of the like esport commonly used weapons. The only potential downside is the fact that it may require more shots to kill than something like an SKS or an SLR on paper, but in reality, it seems like the consistency that the Mini 14 brings is worth it. Next up, and this one should be no surprise, the absolute monster that is the M24 Sniper Rifle, and this is very functionally similar to the Carnegie, as you guys know, also an X airdrop weapon, meaning at least in terms of bolt action, you don't need to run a cheek pad on here, you don't need a compensator, you just need really an extended mag and a suppressor, and you're good to go, assuming you have a scope. But this weapon is the best at two-tapping anything, again, headshot that's under a level 3 helmet. It will not one-shot those at full health, but everything else it eats through. Other than its slightly higher damage, it's statistically super similar to the Carnegie 8, and I don't know in terms of rarity which one is more common to find on the battlefield at this point. I still feel like it's like the Carnegie 8, but the M24 is great whenever you can get your hands on it. Nobody passes it up. Also an extremely popular weapon in the esports scene, just like the Mini 14 as well, so definitely don't want to sleep on this. Coming in above that though is another weapon I know is extremely popular, but I just now got to use it. This is my first attempt at trying to shoot this weapon, but this is the Mark 12, which recently got a buff alongside the M4, and I know this is probably one of the DMRs that is going to be the most competitively viable. It's very similar to the Mini 14. I had to go into training mode and like practice around with it so that whenever I do encounter it in game, it can be, you know, a lot more useful to me. This was first introduced on Deagle, although I believe it's on literally every map now, so this is going to get a lot more playtime, I believe, and probably will be a genuine better alternative to the Mark 14 at some point. And it's a lot of fun for me to use, very customizable again, and I need to get more experience with it, but seems like a great gun overall. Coming in after that, we have arguably one of the most competitively viable guns, the Slr Dmr, and this is probably the harder to use version of the SKS. It's slightly less customizable, but it doesn't really matter. The thing that's broken about this gun is not only the damage is actually very impressive and it's absolutely insane when controlled, but you can fire this so ridiculously fast it kind of looks like a cheat, but it's part of the game. And if you can get the SLR under really, you know, solid and fundamental control, you are going to be an absolute monster. It outguns almost everything, and even some airdrop weapons, I would argue. Realistically though, for it to be at its peak, you need attachments, and the one that's super important is the cheek pad because it does have a ton of kick. If you want to fast fire it, a cheek pad is almost necessary. And I know PUBG have tried to balance the game so that the SLR isn't the only thing that's literally dominating that class, but I don't expect that to change anytime soon. The gun's a literal beast. Speaking of weapons that will never not be in the meta, and one that also got buffed recently, the classic, the king, the M416. Now, I'm gonna say it's not the best gun in the game as of right now, and in fact, we haven't even reached like our really top tier guns in PUBG yet. There's still a few to go, but I will say, as far as guns you're gonna come across commonly, this will likely be the best one, and especially after the recent buff. The thing is, the M4 will never not be viable just because of how the gun is built. Not only is the damage good and the recoil very easy to control, it's one of the best beginner guns, but it's also extremely customizable in the sense that anything you run on it really works. You can use it as a mid-range weapon with, you know, 3 or 4x scopes and vertical grips, or you can make it somewhat a little more close range with like a light grip and a red dot. Whatever you want, however you want to play it, the gun is a beast. Muscle memory and recoil control also play a big part in how, you know, well this weapon performs for you, and it's the gun that by far out of anything I have the most hours and most kills put into. So, you know, at some rate, this is the gun that I've mastered in some sense, and I'm sure a lot of people have as well. And no one would argue the fact that the M4 will probably always be one of the best guns in the game. So next up, and this is getting to a lot of the crate guns and what is literally a better version of the M4, but the reason reason it's not, you know, as viable. It's just way harder to get. You can only get out of airdrops, but the AUG is a fantastic assault rifle that just statistically and on paper is better than the M4. The only thing, subjectively speaking, is myself and a lot of other people think the AUG just feels a little weird to control, and it can maybe cause your performance to be a little off. The AUG has a tendency to feel, I don't know, kind of awkward at times, but otherwise, when it's hitting, it really is hitting. So super fun gun to play, and again, only obtainable through airdrops, but it's so fun. Next up in our god tier of weapons is a really unique weapon that, again, we like honestly begged for at this point, and it's super strange because this has its own ammo type. It's 5.7, and it's also can take no attachments. It's like one of the only SMGs that you cannot customize at all. It's got its own unique laser sight, also optic. It's really cool, and I gotta say the P90 absolutely shreds at virtually any range, up close or even, you know, mid distance. I think it's absolutely stellar, and it's probably become one of my favorite guns, if not my favorite gun in the game. Is it the best in the entire, you know, meta? I'm not really sure. Is it amazing? Absolutely. I strongly recommend trying to get the P90 as much as you can. Obviously, it's a crate only, but it's great. Next up, we have the Barrel M762, and I'm not necessarily implying that the Barrel is somehow better than the P90, but in terms of what you're going to see most commonly on the ground and in the meta, it will be the Barrel more often than the P90, although you know, should respect both of them. The Barrel is probably the 7.62 equivalent of the M4 in the sense that it's the most well-rounded and probably best time to kill common gun that you're going to find, and obviously you're going to want compensators and either an angled grip or a vertical grip for this one. The Barrel is a lot harder to control than the M4, but is going to grant you better results. So I think this is, once you're an experienced player, you'll gravitate towards the Barrel more than anything, I would say. Coming up next, we have another airdrop weapon, which I don't know if you guys have a similar experience. Please let me know in the comments, but genuinely, this gun, for some reason, is the most common one for me to get out of crates. I swear, like, I don't know, a 90 out of 100 would be the MG3, and I remember not being a huge fan of this gun when it first got released to the game, but the more I play with it, the more I realize how utterly broken and ridiculous the MG3 really is. It behaves similarly to the DP28, but it just got a better fire rate, less recoil, and more ammo, and honestly, just more of a laser beam in general. The only thing you can attach to it is optics, so you don't have to worry about everything else, but it really feels sinister. Like, it feels criminal. The FBI should be showing up at my house every time I use this weapon. I don't understand, but I love the MG3 as of now. Coming up next, though, we have the Groza Assault Rifle, and I think this one shouldn't be a controversial pick, especially to more experienced players. I think new people picking up the game, if they are able to get it out of airdrops, are going to find this gun maybe a little bit off-putting or won't really understand why the potential of it is so great. Now, you cannot add a compensator to this, for example. There's no grip options, so on paper, it actually doesn't look like it'd be very good, but those of you who have experienced it in-game know that it's probably the most dangerous assault rifle that PUBG has, and it's absolutely a blast to play with. It's one of the few remaining weapons that have really never been nerfed or changed at all since the game's come out. But getting to our last few weapons here, this one was, again, very tough to rank. It's super unique. This is the Lynx Sniper Rifle, which, in all honesty, may be genuinely the rarest gun in the entire game. Some of you may have not even known this existed. So this gun is airdrops only, obviously, and very, like, I would say similar to the AWM, but also not really. The ammo in it is irreplaceable. Like, not even, you know, AWM ammo you could say is irreplaceable, but it's not if you get another airdrop. This is genuinely irreplaceable, and the bullet velocity is basically a hit scan weapon. It hits like the AWM does, and there's no bolt action to it, so it is literally criminal. In my opinion, though, the Lynx is going to do better against vehicles. That seems to be what it's made for, and the AWM is going to do better against actual players. So, speak of the devil, almost at the top of our list has to be the one and only, the King AWM. We're not quite at the top of the list yet, but we're getting there. The AWM is, as you guys know, literally one of the best guns in the game, like, inarguably, and honestly, it doesn't really need attachments all that much. I even think the cheek pad and even a suppressor don't do a whole lot for the AWM. It's got a pretty distinct and recognizable sound anyways, so the suppressor isn't going to do a whole lot in that regard. The best thing you can run on it is obviously like an optimized scope, you know, something decent like a 4 to 6, maybe even 8 times. You can even handle a 15x scope on the AWM because of its extreme bullet velocity, very similar to the Mini 14 in that way, but again, the damage is just like on another dimension. I guess now, technically, besides the Lynx, this is the only sniper rifle in the game, or practically one of the only real weapons in the game, that can one-shot somebody anybody at full health with a level 3 helmet. Really, only the AWM and the Lynx can do that with 1 bullet. The ammo is technically still replaceable, although it's extremely difficult to do so. But finally, coming in at the top of this list, the #1 spot, still unchanged from after I took my break and coming back in 2022, I have to give it to the Mark 14. And the reason being, it is every gun under the sun and more. If you're good at it, you can quickly change the weapon from being a DMR that not only comes with its own bipod and can be extremely effective, but also it can just turn into a straight up melting, deleting assault rifle, which is beyond sinister. And I don't know if you guys agree, but when you either play this gun in game or you see it in the kill feed or you know somebody has it, this gun literally commands respect, and people are afraid to fight you if you have it. You know, they're afraid to fight against you, or people are way more cautious to approach you. It's the scariest gun in the game, hands down, although it doesn't necessarily look like it from the get-go, but it is quite literally still the GOAT of PUBG. At this point in time in 2022, I seriously don't see anything being added that's more versatile and more effective than the Mark 14. And you know what? And at the end of the day, I'm okay with that. This is literally the GOAT, and it probably forever will be. So I think you guys would probably agree with that if you've at least played with the gun more than once. But anyways, that is ranking every single gun in PUBG from worst to best. There's some weapons we didn't get to, like obviously the melee weapons, and I'm not going to rank the crossbow, but other than that, those are the mainline guns of this game, and this is how I rank them. So let me know what you guys think about my list down below in the comment section, but I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new, and also, again, if you want you guys use my creator code, that would be very much appreciated. Link to that is down below in the description. Please let me know if you do use my code so I can personally thank you, and also I stream on Twitch, that everything can be found down below, but I don't want to waste any more of your guys' time. I really appreciate you for watching, and have a great rest of your day. I will see you all in the next one. Take it easy, and peace out.